The wind howled across the red clay hills like a mourning widow. Dust swirled through the bones of the dying town of Red Hollow, slipping under doors and into the cracks of every weather-beaten building, including the crooked little shack at the edge of town where Martha Whitlow lived. She stirred a pot over a creaking fire, stirring slowly, methodically, like someone who had nothing better to do and no one waiting on her. The stew was mostly turnip and a little hope. She'd added the last scrap of bacon she had 2 nights ago. Now it was just her, the turnips, and silence. Martha was 35, broad in the hips, sturdy in the arms, with the kind of face folks politely called homely. Too poor to dress it up, too smart to pretend it didn't matter. Red Hollow had whispered about her since she was 20, first with pity, then with disdain, and now with boredom. She'd grown thick where other women had grown elegant. Her dresses letting out seams year after year while the world passed her by. Once, she'd had dreams of owning a bakery. There had been a time, years ago, when the scent of fresh dough and cinnamon had meant something to her, something close to freedom. But dreams had a way of going stale in Red Hollow. Her parents were long dead. Her brother had gambled away the family land, then skipped town when she was 23. And ever since, she'd been trying to survive in the leftover pieces of a life that had never fit quite right. Her dog, Beans, limped across the dusty floor and set his head on her knee. He was half blind, missing part of an ear, and smelled perpetually of river muck. But he was loyal, and he didn't care she had strong shoulders or that her fingers were calloused from kneading dough and chopping wood. Martha looked out the window at the setting sun, casting a crimson glow on the landscape. Another day, another nothing. The knock on her door startled her. No one visited, not unless they wanted something. She opened the door a crack. It was Sheriff Tillman, red-nosed and always half-drunk by sundown. "Martha," he said, tipping his hat in that slow, pitiful way. "There's going to be a dance at the town hall next week. All the ladies are bringing pies. Just letting you know." She stared at him. "Is that a request or a warning?" He chuckled uneasy. "Just thought you might want to feel part of things. I've made peace with Not." He opened his mouth, maybe to say something sympathetic, but she shut the door before he could. A pie for the town dance. She could see it already, the smirks, the whispers. How the banker's daughter would laugh behind her lace fan, and some fool cowboy would pretend to court her as a joke. She'd seen it before. The way they made a show of trying to find poor Martha a man, as if she was a stray dog to be pitted or a challenge for a drunken dare. But that night, something different stirred inside her. A quiet fury, not fire-hot, but heavy and old, like embers under ash. She didn't deserve this life. Not really, but no one had come to save her, and she wasn't the sort to beg. The next morning, she grabbed her basket and headed into the hills. There were berries up near Widow's Creek, and if she could gather enough, she could make something sweet. Not for the dance, for herself. The walk was long, the path winding and overgrown. Thorns snagged her dress. The sun beat down like judgment, but she pressed on, swatting bugs, huffing through the brambles, until she reached the creek. Birds chirped overhead. The cool rush of water soothed her boots. And nestled near the bank were the berries, plump, wild, and blood-red. She reached down and began to gather, humming to herself. Then the silence shifted. Beans growled low. Martha froze, her hand full of berries. The rustling was too loud for a rabbit, too purposeful. She turned slowly, and her heart slammed in her chest. A wild boar stood just 30 paces away, tusks glinting, eyes fixed on her. It was enormous. Its bristled hide quivered with muscle and rage. She didn't scream. Martha dropped the berries and picked up the biggest stick she could find. The boar pawed the earth, snorted, and charged. She swung. The stick cracked across its snout, and it screamed, an awful gurgling sound. It reared back and charged again. She ran, but the ground was uneven. She stumbled, fell, rolled. It came for her again, faster than anything that size should be. Beans barked, trying to distract it, but it didn't care. She scrambled for her knife, a small thing she carried in her apron. Useless, but she held it anyway. Then a shot rang out. The boar jerked mid-charge and collapsed just feet from her. Dust and blood filled the air. Its legs twitched once, then went still. Martha blinked. Her hands trembled. A figure on horseback appeared through the brush. "Ma'am," he said, swinging down. "You all right?" He was young, mid-20s at most. Broad-shouldered, sun-kissed skin, eyes the color of river stones. A rifle slung over his back, a lopsided smile on his face. She nodded, heart still racing. "I was just picking berries." He looked at the carcass, then back at her. "Well, you damn near picked a fight with death. That was brave." "Was stupid." "Brave and stupid. Best kind." She stood, brushing off dirt. "I didn't need rescuing." He raised an eyebrow. "Seemed like you had it handled with a twig and a paring knife." She smirked despite herself. "Could have gotten a few good stabs in before it gored me." He reached for her hand, helped her up with surprising gentleness. "I'm Caleb," he said. "Caleb Dunham." The name hit her like a slap. Dunham, as in Dunham Ranch, the richest family in the entire county. His father practically owned half the land west of the river. Folks called him King Dunham behind his back. "And this boy was his son? What are you doing way out here?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "Exploring. Escaping. Bit of both." He looked around, then at her again. "You live nearby?" She hesitated, "Just south of town." His eyes didn't flicker with recognition. Maybe he hadn't heard the stories. Maybe he didn't know who she was. "That was good swing, and by the way," he added, "you got arms like a lumberjack." She laughed before she could stop herself. "Well," she said, "you got charm like a fox and timing like a miracle." Caleb grinned, reached into his saddlebag, and pulled out a canteen. "Care for some water? I'm told it's the polite thing after savon someone from a boar." She drank. He watched her with easy interest, no mockery, no judgment. "Just interest." "I'd offer you some stew," she said, "but it's mostly turnip and poor decisions." He chuckled. "Best stew I ever had was made of squirrel, whiskey, and regret. So I ain't picky." They talked for a while longer, nothing urgent, just the kind of drifting conversation that feels like a warm fire in a cold room. He was easy to be around. No stammering, no sideways glances at her hips or awkward comments about her age. Just talk, real and simple. As the sun dipped low, he finally stood to go. "Will I see you again?" She tilted her head. "You plan on rescuing more women from wild hogs?" "I was thinking maybe I'd drop by sometime. Help fix your roof if you got one that leaks." She hesitated, her heart confused, tangled between defense and yearning. "You don't know who I am," she said. He paused. "Do I need to?" She said nothing. "All right, Ben," he said, mounting his horse. "I'll bring nails, maybe some flour if you bake." "I used to," she said softly. "Well," he tipped his hat, "let's see if you remember how." And with that, he rode off, the setting sun casting gold over his silhouette. Martha stood there long after he vanished, staring at the trail, the dead boar, the crushed berries scattered in the dust. No one had looked at her like that in years. Not like a joke, not like a bird, like a woman. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Martha Whitlow didn't feel like she was waiting to die. She felt like something was about to begin. The first time Caleb returned, it was just after sunrise. Martha had barely finished feeding beans and splitting a fresh stack of kindling when she heard the steady crunch of hooves along the dry path leading to her cabin. She stepped out, apron dusted in flour, brow furrowed. He was already grinning when he dismounted. "Morning, Miss Whitlow," he said, tipping his hat. "You remembered my name," she replied, surprised. "Well, when a woman nearly kills a boar with a stick, it tends to stick in a man's memory." She tried not to smile, but her cheeks betrayed her. "You really came back?" "I brought flour like I promised, and nails. Figured we could see if your oven still has life in it, and your roof too." Martha opened the door wide. "Hope you don't expect anything too fancy. Most of my recipes died from neglect." Inside, the cabin was cleaner than he remembered, sparse but homey. Her fire still crackled in the hearth. He set the supplies on the table and looked around. "You fix the shutters," he noted. "I fix what I can," she replied, pulling out a bowl. "I was poor before it was fashionable." "I'm not here out of pity," Caleb said plainly. "I'm here because I want to be." She glanced at him uncertain, but something in his voice was too steady to argue with. She began to measure flour, and he rolled up his sleeves to help. The first loaf was terrible, dense, flat, and tasteless. They both spat out laughing. The second was a little better. The third filled the house with the warm scent of yeast and sugar, and when they pulled it out and tasted the crust, they looked at each other and nodded. Still got it? Caleb said, mouth full. Martha smirked. That was me. Your contribution was burning the first two. He leaned closer. Every good baker needs an assistant to ruin things once in a while. Keeps her humble. For the next few days, he came back often, always with something: fresh eggs, wild honey, a bag of spices from a trader. Sometimes just the stories, always full of wit and wonder. She'd never met a man who smiled so easily or listened so carefully. Most people, if they listened at all, only did it waiting for their turn to speak. With Caleb, she felt heard and seen. They sat beneath the oak tree one night, bread cooling on the windowsill behind them, the horizon burning orange. Why were you really here? She asked quietly. He thought about it. You ever feel like everything folks expect of you is wrong? All the time. He nodded. My family wants me to take over the ranch, marry the banker's daughter, breed horses, and count profits till I die. And you don't want that? I want this. He motioned to the loaf behind them. I want a bakery. I want something made by hand, not inheritance. Something warm, not bought. Martha looked down at her flour-dusted fingers. And you think you can get that with me? He turned to her. Martha, you're the first person I've met who doesn't wear a mask. You say what you mean. You fight for yourself. That's rare. She felt her throat tighten, emotion crawling up like a slow burn. I'm not what they want for you. I'm not what they want either. Silence stretched between them. He reached for her hand. I'm not a fool, he said gently. I know how people look at us. You're older. I'm rich. You've had a hard life. I've had too easy a one. But none of that matters if we make something real. She stared at their hands, her pulse thudding in her ears. You don't know what they'll do to you. Let him try, he said. They kissed beneath the oak tree, not soft or shy, but with all the messy, unpracticed emotion of two people who never thought they'd find someone. The next day, everything changed. Word got out. No one said how. Maybe a rider spotted him leaving her place. Maybe the sheriff said something careless. But by dusk, Red Hollow was buzzing. The whispers were cruel. The jokes came fast. Caleb Dunham's corked a hippo, one man laughed at the saloon. Guess he's had a taste for lard with his bread. Martha ignored them. She'd been mocked before. She could survive it again. But Caleb didn't hide. He walked beside her to the market, bought her thread, offered his arm, smiled like a man in love and not ashamed. That night, two riders showed up at her cabin. She didn't open the door, just stared through the window, watching them throw a stone at her steps and ride off laughing. One of them had tied a dress, hers stolen from a line, around a scarecrow with a pig's head. Martha burned it without a word. Caleb came the next morning, saw the ashes, and his face hardened. We need to leave, he said. She folded her arms. This is my home. This is your prison. He took her hand. Come away with me. Let's go north. I've got money stashed. Enough to build a little place. A real bakery. A clean start. I'm 35, Caleb. I've got more past than future. I don't want the future without you. He meant it. She knew it. But something deep inside still resisted, fear, pride, something old and crusted over from too many years alone. That night, they sat on her porch, fire crackling low. I loved someone once, she whispered. A long time ago. He said he'd marry me, that he didn't care what people thought. But when the time came, he walked away. Married a girl half my size with hair like spun gold. Told me he was doing me a kindness. Caleb was quiet for a long while. Then he said, I don't have spun gold, but I got hands that know how to hold on. She looked at him. You really want to marry me? More than anything. The wedding happened 3 mornings later. Quiet, no church, no crowd. Just a preacher from the next town over, standing in the field behind her cabin. Her dress was sewn from curtains. He wore his best shirt and a crooked tie. Beans barked at the horses like he was giving them away. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her like he'd found something sacred. And Martha cried, not because she was sad or scared, but because for once, life had given her something soft. They didn't get a honeymoon. That night, while they were packing, a rock shattered their window. A note tied to it read, Leave, or we'll bury her. Caleb wanted to fight. Martha said no. We run. We live. By morning, they were gone. They rode north, traveling by night. Slept beneath trees, forded rivers, lived on cornbread and coffee. Caleb carried her when her feet blistered. She hunted rabbits when his shoulder ached. They were equals, not rescuers. Not rescued. One day, they stopped beside a wide river. The sky was overcast, the wind sharp. Caleb was quiet, staring out across the water. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated. "My father sent my brother after us." Her blood ran cold. "How do you know?" "Because he left a sign, a cut in the bark, same way we used to track cattle." She gripped the rifle tighter. "You regret it?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not one damn second." That night, they huddled close under the tarp, rain tapping steady on canvas. Martha listened to Caleb's heartbeat, steady against her cheek. "You still want that bakery?" she asked softly. He laughed into her hair. "More than ever." "Then we'll build it." His arms tightened around her. "Even if they come for us?" "Especially if they come for us." The storm passed. They rode deeper into the mountains, hoping to find a town where no one knew her name. No one cared who his father was. They found an old abandoned shack half collapsed, near a creek lined with pines. It had no roof, no door, and smelled like squirrel droppings. But it had good bones. "This could work," Caleb said, grinning. Martha stood in the doorway, wind blowing her hair wild. "We'll need windows and an oven, a proper one. We'll build it." That night, they made love beneath the stars, a blanket pulled tight around them, and the scent of pine in the air. It was clumsy and sweet and perfect in the way only two broken people finding comfort can be. They slept wrapped in each other, dreaming not of fear or fire, but of sugar, yeast, and the warmth of something rising. By morning, Martha woke first. She stepped outside barefoot, looking at the clearing, the creek, the trees. For the first time, the world didn't feel like a place that had rejected her. It felt like something waiting to be claimed. She turned as Caleb stepped out beside her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning, Mrs. Dunham." She smiled. "You hungry?" "Starving." "Then let's build a damn bakery." The days that followed were hard, but they were theirs. Caleb and Martha worked with calloused hands and aching backs, dragging lumber from nearby ruins, chopping fallen trees, crafting what they could with little more than rusted tools and stubborn will. Each plank nailed into place, each brick stacked for their future oven, was a small defiance against wealth, against expectation, against the ghosts of a life neither wanted anymore. They found rhythm in the wilderness. Caleb built while Martha cooked. She gathered wild onions and nettles, hunted rabbits with a slingshot, and stitched blankets from old feed sacks. Caleb fished in the creek, set traps for game, and read to her by firelight from a water-damaged almanac they'd found in the shack. At night, wrapped beneath wool, their bodies pressed together, they whispered dreams of sourdough, gingerbread, pies with lattice crusts, and a shop window with her name painted in gold. Sometimes they spoke of Red Hollow. Mostly they didn't. Martha had never felt younger or more alive. In the quiet between chores, she caught a reflection in the creek. Not thinner, not prettier, but fuller somehow. Her eyes held light again. Her laughter came easier. And when Caleb touched her, he did so like he'd found something sacred. Then one morning, she woke to silence. No crackle of fire. No whistle from the pot. No Caleb humming off-key while chopping wood. "Caleb," she called, stepping into the clearing. His horse was gone. She spun, breath hitching. Beans, now grayer and slower, whined and sniffed the air. He trotted to the tree-line, nose down. Her heart beat in her throat as she followed. Near the edge of the woods, she found it, a small patch of churned dirt, hoof prints, and a broken twig still swaying. Caleb had been taken. She saw the drag marks, the scuffed boot prints. He hadn't gone willingly. She dropped to her knees, pressing her fingers into the tracks, reading them the way her father once taught her. 3 horses, 2 riders, one being dragged. They'd headed north. Martha stood, eyes burning. "Bean, stay." She packed fast, rifle jerky, her hunting knife, a handful of nails she stuffed into her coat pocket. Then she saddled her own mare and rode like the devil was on her heels. The forest narrowed into dense, pine-choked hills. Ravens watched from above. Somewhere a hawk cried out. Hours passed. Her thighs ached. The horse huffed beneath her. But she didn't stop. Not when the trail narrowed. Not when her gut twisted with fear. By dusk she smelled smoke. She tied the horse to a tree and crept forward on foot. Below, in a rocky clearing, a campfire flickered. 2 men sat beside it. One of them was Caleb's older brother, Josiah, recognizable by the slick blonde hair and permanent sneer. The other was unfamiliar, grizzled, with sharp eyes and a jagged scar across his neck. Caleb lay nearby, tied at the wrists, lips split, shirt bloodied. Martha's hand tightened on her rifle. "You think she'll come?" the scarred man asked. "Oh, she'll come," Josiah drawled. "She's dumb enough to believe this is love. All pigs are. Soft, stupid creatures." The other man laughed. Caleb stirred, groaned. Martha's vision narrowed. She moved through the trees like a shadow, circling the camp until she found a better angle. From her perch, she could see Caleb's face. One eye swollen shut, but alive. She breathed in, out, and then the branch beneath her snapped. Both men stood instantly, guns drawn. Martha bolted. Shots rang out. Bark exploded beside her. She hit the ground hard, rolling behind a boulder. Her ribs screamed. Dirt filled her mouth. "Come on out, sweetheart," Josiah called. "We just want a little talk." She didn't answer. Her heart thundered in her ears. The rifle dug into her side. "You really think he's worth it?" the scarred man yelled. "A boy like him choosing you? You're a joke." That did it. She rose, took aim, and fired. The bullet caught the scarred man in the leg. He screamed, collapsing into the fire. Chaos exploded. Josiah shouted. Caleb shouted something back. Martha couldn't hear. Another shot grazed her arm. Pain lanced up to her shoulder, but she kept moving, kept firing. She rushed the camp like a storm, barrel smoking, mouth dry. Caleb rolled away from the fire, shouting her name. She reached him, dropped to her knees, cut the rope at his wrist with her knife. "Get up," she rasped. "We're going. I told you to stay safe. Shut up and run." They sprinted into the woods as more shots echoed behind them. Caleb stumbled once, but she pulled him forward, teeth gritted. Her arm throbbed. Blood ran hot down her sleeve. They ran for what felt like hours. Only when the moon was high did they stop, lungs burning, bodies shaking. Martha collapsed against a tree, breath ragged. Caleb knelt beside her, touching her face like she might vanish. "You got shot," he said, horrified. "It's not bad," she lied. "I've burned myself worse." He started to argue, but she reached up and kissed him. Not soft. "Fierce? I will not bury you," she whispered. "Do you hear me? I already buried too much of my life." He held her tight. "I'm not going anywhere." They stayed hidden for 2 days. Martha's arm stiffened, but the bleeding stopped. Caleb insisted on cleaning the wound, and though his hands shook, his voice stayed calm. He told her about the ambush, how Josiah and that scarred bastard had grabbed him while he was fetching water, how they planned to drag him home, marry him off, break him like a horse. "They said you'd forget me eventually," he murmured. Martha chuckled, pained. "Fools." On the 3rd morning, they rode again, through valley and ridge, under the ever-watching sky. They found a small town nestled between hills, too quiet to ask questions. They paid a carpenter to help reinforce a cabin, traded bread for lumber. The scars on Caleb's face faded. The one on Martha's arm didn't, but she wore it like a badge. They built again, not just a home, but a storefront. Windows, a real oven, a sign above the door that read, "The Rising Sun Bakery." On opening day, no one came. By day 3, the smell of bread drew them in, farm hands, widows, hungry children. By day 7, a woman from the church asked for the recipe to Martha's cinnamon rolls. They never spoke of Red Hollow, but one evening a rider appeared, dust-covered and road-worn. He didn't enter, just watched from the edge of the clearing. Martha stepped out, rifle in hand. It was Josiah. His eyes, hard, red-rimmed, met hers. He said nothing. She didn't blink. He turned, rode off without a word. Later that night, Martha and Caleb sat on the porch, sharing a slice of honey pie. Her stitches had healed. His lip was whole, but something lingered between them, a silence more powerful than words. You afraid he'll come back? Caleb asked. No, she said. He saw what he needed to. What's that? That I'm not running anymore. Caleb nodded slowly, then grinned. You're the toughest woman I've ever met. She smirked. I've killed a boar, baked bread in a fire pit, and shot a man for you. You better appreciate that. Oh, I do, he said, drawing her close. Every damn day. They sat until the stars blinked into view, the night calm, the world finally quiet. And for once there was no chase, no fear, no flight. Just the smell of rising dough, and love that refused to die. The sign swung gently in the morning breeze, its hand-carved letters gleaming in gold. The Rising Sun Bakery. Below it, a line of townsfolk stretched along the wooden sidewalk, boots tapping impatient rhythms, noses tilted up to catch the scent of honey glaze and warm cinnamon. Martha stood behind the counter, cheeks dusted with flour, sleeves rolled high. Her hands moved with practiced rhythm, folding, slicing, lifting steaming loaves onto trays. Her scarred arm no longer made her flinch. It was a reminder now of a life she'd fought for and nearly died to keep. Caleb moved among the tables, greeting regulars, refilling mugs with strong black coffee. He wore a linen shirt rolled to the sleeves, his hair longer now, untamed by town expectations. When his eyes met hers across the room, there was still that flicker of awe, as though he couldn't quite believe she was real. They had been in Silver Creek for 3 months, long enough to be known, not long enough to be forgotten. The townsfolk had warmed to them quickly, drawn first by the food, then by the feeling. The bakery was more than bread. It was refuge. Something about the place made people speak softly, linger longer, laugh louder. Martha had transformed, not in shape, but in spirit. There was a brightness to her, a force behind her words, her posture, her gaze. She'd learned how to command space without apology, how to smile without bracing for insult. She didn't need defending. She was the defense. But peace, she knew, was always temporary. The first warning came on a Tuesday just after sunrise. Caleb found it nailed to the post out front, a single white feather, clean and sharp. The symbol of the Dunham Ranch, of surrender or of demand. He brought it in without a word and set it gently on the counter. Martha stared at it for a long moment. They found us, she said flatly. Caleb nodded. Neither spoke of leaving. By dusk, the line outside had thinned, but the tension inside had not. They won't come quietly, Caleb murmured as they closed up shop. My father doesn't do quiet. He'll bring muscle, lawyers, guns, if it comes to that. Let them, Martha said. He hesitated. They'll make it ugly. She turned to face him. I am ugly. That's what they think, isn't it? Ugly, fat, worthless, the shame of their son. His eyes flared. You know I don't believe that. I do. I just needed to say it first. She walked to the window and looked out over the hills where storm clouds were gathering. They think they can scare us out, or buy us off, or make us small. But I've been small. I've been quiet. I've been nothing to everyone for so long, I almost forgot I was something to myself. He stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. They're not going to win, he whispered. No, she agreed. They're not. 2 nights later, the Dunhams arrived. 6 riders, polished saddles, rifle scabbards. Josiah at the lead, clean-shaven, grinning like a man with a loaded gun and no conscience. Behind him, their father, Ambrose Dunham, rode tall and cold, suit spotless, eyes sharp as a hawk's. The townsfolk scattered like leaves. Doors shut. Curtains twitched. Martha stepped out onto the porch before they could dismount. Caleb stood beside her, jaw set. Josiah spat into the dirt. Didn't think pigs knew how to run bakeries. Martha didn't flinch. Didn't think cowards showed up with 6 men to threaten 2. Ambrose dismounted slowly. His boots landed with heavy finality. I gave you time, he said to Caleb, voice smooth and venomous. Time to come home. Time to fix your mistake. You wasted it. Caleb's hand dropped to his side, near the rifle leaning against the doorframe. She's not a mistake, he said. Ambrose's mouth curled into a sneer. She's nothing. Martha stepped forward, 1 foot on the ground, her hands empty but steady. I've scrubbed blood from my porch, dug, let out of my arm, watched men ride off thinking they'd broken me. I've faced boars, bullets, and your pathetic attempts at shame. You want to fight, old man? Her voice rang across the clearing. Then shoot me, right here, in front of this sign, in front of your son, in front of a town that now knows me not as fat, not as unwanted, but as Martha Whitlow Dunham, owner of the finest damn bakery between here and the Rio. Josiah laughed. You think anyone here will stop us? Martha didn't blink. No, but I will. A silence fell like a heavy curtain. Then the door behind her creaked open. The townsfolk had returned. Quietly, steadily, they emerged, rifles in hand, forming a half-moon behind Martha. The school teacher, the carpenter, the widow with the limp. Even the sheriff, rifle across his chest, gave a slow nod. Ambrose's eyes narrowed. You want a war? Martha asked. Start it. Ambrose looked at Caleb. You'll lose everything. The land, the money, the name. I've already gained more than that, Caleb replied. I gained her. Ambrose stared for a long, heavy moment. Then he turned to Josiah. This town's not worth the blood. Josiah's smile faltered. But, mount up. The Dunhams rode off, their silhouettes swallowed by the dusk. Not a shot fired. When they were gone, Martha exhaled slowly. The townsfolk lingered. Some clapped her on the shoulder. Others offered quiet praise. But most simply nodded, eyes filled with something approaching reverence. Caleb kissed her forehead. You did that, he said. No, she whispered. We did. The next morning, the line outside the bakery was longer than ever. Martha baked with fire in her bones, with pride in her chest, with joy she didn't know she was capable of. She watched Caleb laugh with a child over spilled jam, watched the sun stream in through their windows, and felt the final stone of doubt fall from her heart. She was no one's shame, no man's mistake, no town's punchline. She was the woman he chose, and more importantly, she was the woman who chose herself. Later that night, as the stars blinked to life and the scent of bread faded into the cool air, Martha sat on the porch with Caleb beside her, his hand in hers. Think they'll come back, he asked. They might, she said. And if they do? She smiled. Then I'll bake something special, with a touch of cinnamon and a whole lot of vengeance. He laughed, head tipped back to the stars. The world, once so cruel, was finally quiet. And this time she knew it was hers. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and comment. Share the video, support us with a super chat, or join our memberships to help us create more. The wind screamed across the high plains like a dying thing, hollow and sharp, carrying with it the kind of cold that bit deep into bone and memory. It shrieked between the skeletal trees, tore at the skirts of the old woman standing alone beside the ruts of the wagon trail, and whipped ice crystals into her weathered face. Ruth McKinley didn't flinch. Her gray eyes, dry and tired, remained fixed on the narrowing shapes of the departing wagons, for 6, 7 of them, vanishing one by one into the snow-choked horizon. No one looked back. The last wagon, a faded canvas-topped rattletrap drawn by a pair of malnourished mules, had carried the voice of Amos Hargreave, their so-called trail leader. Ain't personal, he'd said gruffly that morning, not meeting her eyes. We just can't afford the drag. Winter's coming too fast. He hadn't waited for a response. They'd left without ceremony, like a man spitting out a bad tooth and moving on. Ruth stood silent until the wind snuffed the last echo of wagon wheels. Then, slowly, she turned to face her grandchildren. Eli was already pacing, muttering curses he thought she couldn't hear, his gloved hands balled into fists. The boy had just turned 15 last month, but he wore his father's scowl now, tight-jawed, silent, dangerous. Maggie, 13, smaller and wiry, sat on the overturned crate that had been too bulky to load. Her wool shawl was wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her breath puffing in little clouds that vanished instantly. They ain't coming back, Eli spat. No, Ruth said softly. They aren't. Silence settled like snowfall. Ruth knelt beside the battered mule that had been the catalyst for their abandonment. Daisy was old, just like her, one leg dragging uselessly behind her. Ruth reached out, pressed her hand against the mule's broad forehead. We can't eat her, Eli said. I know, Ruth replied. She's family. Maggie stood and walked over, the snow crunching under her patch boots. She looked smaller than usual beneath the heavy coat, swallowed by sorrow and the horizonless white. "What do we do now, Grandma?" Ruth stood slowly, knees protesting. "We go forward." "Forward where?" Eli's voice cracked. "There's nothing out here but cold and trees and wolves." "We find shelter, food, firewood." She turned toward the tree line. "And we don't waste time crying about folks who ain't worth the tears." It was meant to sting, and it did. The three of them moved into the forest, Ruth leading, Daisy dragging behind on a torn rope lead. Snow clung to branches overhead, occasionally thumping down like the sky itself was exhaling. The cold settled into Ruth's joints like unwelcome memories. Every step was an argument with her own body. They walked until the light grew thin and sullen, the clouds overhead purpling with dusk. Ruth found a shallow depression between two moss-covered rocks where the wind eased, and they stopped. "We'll camp here," she said. "No firewood," Eli muttered. "No food. I didn't say it'd be a good camp." He shook his head and trudged off toward the trees, swinging the small hatchet they'd salvaged. Maggie sat beside Daisy, stroking the animal's side and humming something tuneless under her breath. Ruth pulled a frayed woolen blanket from the bundle she tied to her back, spread it over them, and began to dig a fire pit with her bare hands. By the time Eli returned with an armload of damp branches, Ruth had built a ring of stones and lined it with dry pine needles. He dropped the wood with a grunt. "They're wet," he warned. "Everything's wet," she replied, reaching into her coat for a twist of paper and flint. She struck once, twice, then again. The spark caught, flickered, died. Another try. The third time. The flame hesitated on the paper like it was thinking it over, then flared. All three leaned in, watching the fire take root like it was a miracle. It smoked and hissed as the wet bark sizzled, but it held. As the heat began to rise, Maggie crept closer. Her cheeks were blotched red from cold and wind, but her eyes still held that watchful calm Ruth had seen since the girl was little. "Grandma," she whispered, "do you think Mama's watching us?" Ruth didn't answer right away. She stirred the fire, poked at a smoldering branch, and finally said, "If she is, she's cussing the lot of them for leaving us." Maggie gave a tiny, private smile. When darkness swallowed the forest, the wolves came. Not seen, only heard. Long, low howls that rose over the hills like ghosts waking in the pine. Eli tensed immediately. "They're close." "They're always close," Ruth said. "They just wait till we forget." The fire crackled. Ruth turned toward the trees, squinting. One howl answered by another, then another. Closer. Eli stood. "We can't fight wolves." "No," Ruth said, "but we can fool them." She pulled a length of canvas from the bundle, fashioned a crude torch, dipped it in the fire. When it caught, she handed it to Eli. "Don't wave it. Hold it steady. They fear fire, not fools." He held it like it might explode, his shadow long and twitching in the trees. "Let it burn," she muttered, more to herself than anyone. That night they slept in fits, if sleep is what you could call it. Ruth lay against the rock wall, knife in hand, one ear open, one eye half-lidded. She didn't expect to see morning. But morning came. The fire had died to coals, and Eli's hand was wrapped around Maggie's shoulder like a promise. Ruth sat up, every bone aching. Daisy was alive, her ears twitching at distant bird calls. "We need food," she said. Eli grunted in agreement, already moving to his feet. "I'll check the ridge. Maybe find rabbit tracks." Ruth shook her head. "We move together. You can barely walk," he argued. "Then I'll crawl." "No one splits up. That's settler logic. We ain't settlers no more." The day passed in trudging steps. They climbed a low ridge, descended into a hollow thick with fir. Maggie found a creek beneath a film of ice and scooped water in cupped hands. Ruth watched her, the girl's movements slow, careful, graceful in a way her mother once had been. The hunger made her sharp, sharp of tongue, sharp of memory. She saw her son again, Maggie's father, young, foolish, standing in the doorway of their Missouri cabin with a knapsack full of dreams and nothing else. "Heading west, Ma," he'd said, "where there's land and no one telling you what to do." She hadn't stopped him. Couldn't have. Just like she hadn't stopped him from dying of fever 6 months ago, his body wrapped in a canvas tarp and buried beneath a makeshift stone cross 3 days before Maggie and Eli were orphaned into her care. She shook off the memory. They paused at midday, huddled around the last scraps of dry bread, half a crust. Ruth handed it to Maggie without discussion. The girl took it reluctantly, broke off a piece, and gave it to Eli. He gave his to Ruth. She didn't refuse. She'd learned not to waste energy on pride. A shadow passed overhead, a hawk, its wings stretched wide, gliding through the heavy sky. That's when Ruth saw it, a shape on the ridge across from them, unmoving, watching. She blinked. Gone. Her breath hitched. Someone was out there. Not settler, not wolf, not anything she could name. They moved again. By late afternoon, clouds began to thicken, darkening like bruises. Snow threatened in every breath of wind. They found a thicket, a narrow pass between two boulders where the trees bent low and blocked the wind. Ruth dropped to her knees. "We'll stop here," she said, her voice hoarse. Eli crouched beside her. "You're freezing." "Then I'll freeze sitting down." They built another fire, smaller this time, a guttering flame between rocks. The shadows stretched long. The wind returned, but something else came too. Footsteps, soft, purposeful. Ruth turned her head slowly. A figure stood just beyond the firelight. Tall, silent, dressed in layers of hide and fur, paint across his cheeks like streaks of storm clouds. He held a spear in one hand, a small knife at his belt, and he made no move forward. Maggie gasped. Eli moved between them, shoulders squared. The figure raised one hand. Open, palm forward. Peace. Ruth stared. Her fingers twitched toward her knife but didn't touch it. He spoke one word. Low, steady, calm. Nothing more. Just that. Then he turned and walked back into the trees, vanishing as quickly as he'd appeared. Eli turned to Ruth, face pale. "Who the hell was that?" Ruth didn't answer immediately. She was listening, not to the man, but to the forest. The wolves had gone silent. Maggie clutched her hand. "Do we follow?" Ruth looked at her, at Eli, at the failing fire. "Yes," she said, and her voice didn't tremble. Then she stood, and the three of them stepped into the trees, toward something, or someone, but whatever it was, it had waited for them, and they had nothing left to lose. The snow was falling heavier by morning, a slow, steady curtain of white that silenced the world. No birdsong, no wind, just a soft whisper of flakes landing on branches, on skin, on the old woman's wide-brimmed hat now crusted in ice. They walked in single file. The stranger from the woods, silent and tall, led the way. His buckskin boots moved without sound, as if the earth itself bent to let him pass. Behind him came Ruth, every step a test of will, her knees swelling under the strain. Maggie followed, one hand gripping the frayed rope tied to Daisy's bridle. The mule staggered, slipping in the snow every few steps. Eli brought up the rear, clutching a stick like a club, eyes darting over his shoulder every few minutes. No one spoke. Words would only hang in the cold and break. The man had said nothing else. Not where they were going, not who he was, only that single word the night before. Come, and then he'd vanished into the shadows until Ruth had chosen to follow. Now he reappeared every few yards, just ahead, as if born of the mist. She hated how much she trusted him already. There was something in the way he moved. He did not look back to see if they followed. He knew they would. Eli had protested when they broke camp, whispering urgently to Ruth as the man disappeared again into the pines. "We don't know him. We don't know anything," she'd replied. "What if he's leading us into a trap? Then we deal with it when it comes." Now the boy trudged in reluctant silence, jaw clenched, glancing at the knife tucked in his belt like it held the answers. They climbed over a low ridge and found a narrow ravine choked with frozen brush. The stranger turned sideways to pass through, boots crunching ice as he led them into the shadow of the cliffs. The air grew colder there, heavier, like the earth was closing in. Ruth's breath came hard. She stumbled once, caught herself. Maggie turned back. "Grandma, I'm fine," she rasped. But she wasn't. Her hip ached. Her thighs trembled. Her feet had gone numb an hour ago. But she forced them forward, one after the other, as she always had, when she birthed 2 sons alone, when she buried her husband in a creek grave, when her youngest had brought home 2 children and then gone off to die of cholera while Ruth held his fevered hand. Always forward, but even her bones had limits. They came to a small clearing, a break in the rock where the sun filtered weakly through and steam rose faintly from the snow. Hot spring. She could smell the sulfur. The man turned to them at last, and for the first time, Ruth saw his face clearly. He was young, barely 20, if that. His skin was wind-burnished and his cheekbones high, with long black hair tied at the nape and red clay paint smeared across his jaw. His eyes, dark and flat, took them all in without emotion. But when he looked at Maggie, something softened slightly. He gestured to the spring. Here. His voice was low, roughened by cold. One word again, but this time it was enough. Eli blinked. We stopping? The man nodded once. They collapsed beside the spring. Ruth sank onto a fallen log with a grunt, her breath hissing between her teeth. Eli dropped to his knees and splashed warm water on his cracked hands. Maggie knelt beside the mule, whispering softly into her ear. The man crouched and began to build a small fire with swift, economical movements. Ruth watched him intrigued by how little motion he wasted. Every flick of the wrist, every shift of his body had purpose. In less than a minute, the fire was blazing. He pulled out a small pouch, untied it, and poured dried strips of something into a small tin pot of water. The smell that rose was gamey but promising. Meat broth. Real food. Ruth's stomach twisted at the scent. The man passed the pot toward her without a word. She didn't reach for it. Your name, she asked. He looked at her. Ashki. She held his gaze. That all? His mouth twitched into something that could have been a smirk or a warning. For now, Ruth accepted that. She sipped, salt and fat. Her hands trembled. It was the best thing she tasted in weeks. Eli hesitated before accepting his portion, watching Ashki closely. Why were you helping us? Ashki didn't answer right away. He turned back to the fire, poked a stick into the flames. I heard the wolves last night, he said finally. They were following your scent. And you thought what? Eli pressed. That you come save us? Ashki's eyes met his. No. I thought if I didn't come, I'd find your bones. Eli stiffened. Ruth touched his arm. Thank you, she said simply. Ashki gave a nod. You're lucky the wind turned. Covered your scent. Otherwise, different story. Maggie looked up. Where are we going? Ashki considered her for a moment. To my people. They winter near the caves east of here. And they'll help us, she asked. Some will? Ruth read between the words. Some won't. Ashki said nothing. The fire cracked, throwing sparks into the air. After they ate, they moved again. Ruth's strength returned slightly with the warmth of broth in her belly, but each step still felt heavier than the last. Snow fell again, lighter this time, glittering in the trees. The forest opened up briefly into a meadow dusted with white. In the middle stood an old elk carcass, torn open and half-frozen. Ashki approached it, crouched, examined the torn flanks. His jaw tightened. Mountain lion, he muttered. Ruth caught the word. How recent? Ashki stood. Maybe a day. Could be near. Eli scanned the trees. You got a gun? Ashki shook his head. Don't need one. Ruth grunted. You'll excuse me if I wish we had one anyway. They moved on. Late afternoon brought a storm. Not snow, but wind, hard and fast, a cold front that swept through the pines like fury made flesh. Trees groaned. The mule bucked once. Maggie cried out. Ruth wrapped her arms around the girl and pulled her tight against her side. They couldn't stop, not here. Ashki led them into a ravine, a gully lined with frozen brush, then up a narrow slope until they reached a ledge. Beneath an overhang, sheltered from the worst of the wind, he pointed. Count. Eli began gathering stones for another fire. Ruth found herself staring at the girl. Maggie's lips were blue, her eyes glassy. Maggie, Ruth said sharply. The girl didn't respond. Ruth dropped to her knees, cupped the girl's face. Maggie. The girl blinked. I'm fine. You're not. She's cold, Ashki said. Dangerously cold. He grabbed his outer fur cloak, wrapped it around her. Keep her by the fire. Rub her hands. Don't let her sleep. Ruth obeyed, rubbing Maggie's fingers between hers, whispering stories from long ago about her own girlhood in Tennessee, how her father taught her to skin rabbits, how her mother used to hum while she boiled lye soap. Useless stories, but they kept the girl awake. Ashki returned from the trees with dry bark. As he built the fire, Ruth caught a glimpse of his side, scars, old and deep, crossing his ribs like claw marks. She didn't ask. When night fell, the storm passed, leaving behind a deathly calm. The fire crackled low. Eli sat beside it, carving lines into a stick with his belt knife, not speaking. Ashki stared into the flames. "Why help us?" Ruth asked again, her voice lower now, gentler. He didn't look at her. "You remind me of someone." "Your mother?" He nodded once. "She died? Left behind?" Ruth said nothing. The silence spoke for them both. Ashki turned to her. "We have a saying, Te Hafisi. It means only yourself. That's what we are taught. That the wind does not wait. That the sun does not ask who you are. That you survive or you don't. And yet here you are, helping strangers." Ashki eyes were distant. "Maybe I got tired of only myself." Ruth watched the embers. "We've been surviving so long I forgot what living felt like. You'll remember. Will I?" Ashki turned to look at Maggie, sleeping now, her cheeks pinked by the fire's heat, then at Eli, who was pretending not to listen. "You already are." That night, Ruth dreamed of wolves. Not the kind that howled, but the kind that walked on two legs and wore hats, rode wagons, made decisions with their boots, and left women and children behind in the snow. She saw Amos Hargreave again, grinning his yellow-toothed smile, tipping his hat like it excused the cowardice. She woke to the crack of branches. Ashki was on his feet, bow drawn, eyes locked on the trees beyond. Eli scrambled up, knife in hand. Ruth held Maggie close. Then nothing, just a deer, bolting across the meadow below. Ashki lowered the bow. Ruth's breath slowly returned. "Tomorrow," he said, voice calm, "we reach the canyon." "And then?" Ruth asked. Ashki looked into the distance, where pale orange had begun to smear across the sky. "Then we see who you become." The canyon rose out of the frost like a buried memory, veiled in drifting mist and jagged with stone teeth. Its walls loomed high and crooked, streaked with ice and charred from old fires. From a ridge, Ruth could see nothing but twisting shadows and white haze below, as if the earth had cracked open to swallow everything foolish enough to tread too slow. Ashki stood at the edge without fear, his breath left in even plumes, unmoved by the wind or the drop before them. He scanned the ridge with the sharp focus of someone trained by seasons, not books. Ruth respected that. There was no arrogance in him, only caution shaped by survival. He pointed down the slope. "We go through the pass. Not above. Too exposed." Eli glanced back at Ruth. "You gonna make it, Grandma?" She smirked, though the cold burned her throat. "Boy, I've made it through births, burnings, and bad husbands. A hill's not about to stop me." "Just checking," he muttered. Maggie shifted closer to the mule, resting her hand on Daisy's neck. The animal was shivering now, her breath thick and slow, but she walked on when coaxed. That mule was a testament to stubbornness, a reflection of Ruth herself. They started down one by one. Ashki took the lead as always, footsteps calculated, shoulders low, eyes flicking between each foothold and the ridges above. The snow here was packed harder, crusted with a slick sheen of ice. Every step was a risk. One slip, and they'd tumble, bones cracking on stone. Ruth's legs were cramping halfway down, her breath turning ragged. She gritted her teeth and pressed forward, using the gnarled roots and frozen shrubs for support. She would not be the reason they failed. Not now. Not after they'd come so far. At the base, the land leveled into a narrow, winding corridor. Walls of jagged rock closed in tight around them, forcing the group into a single line. Ashki paused near a twisted juniper tree, running a hand over a stone marked with faded carvings. "Trail marker?" Ruth asked. He nodded. "This place belongs to the dying. My people, this canyon leads to one of our wintering grounds." "Will they welcome us?" Eli asked, squinting into the canyon. Ashki didn't answer immediately. "If they believe you've come with respect. And if they don't," Maggie's voice was quiet. Ashki turned his head just enough for them to see the scar running behind his ear. Then we'll find another way. They moved deeper into the canyon, where the cold seemed to fold inward like a closed hand. The walls wept thin trickles of water that froze mid-drip, and the wind was muffled, replaced by the distant echo of shifting rock and the occasional raven call. There was something sacred in the silence. Or haunted, the smell of smoke reached them first, thin, woody, and clean. A good fire. Not wildfire. Controlled. Human. Ashki raised a hand, signaling stillness. He knelt, pressed his fingers to the ground, then pointed left toward a bend in the rock where the smell thickened. Ruth watched his body language, tense, alert. Not alarmed, but wary. They crept forward together, steps careful, boots muffled by snow and pine needles. As they rounded the bend, a trail of smoke became visible, rising in gray plumes from behind a narrow ledge. And there, half hidden in the rock's embrace, was a camp. It was modest, 3 low shelters built from timber and hide, backs pressed to stone walls, entrances facing inward toward a central fire pit. A few woven baskets hung from hooks. Animal skins were curing on racks. A dog barked once and fell silent. A man stepped from one of the shelters. He was older, taller than Ashki, with a heavy frame and gray at his temples. His face was painted with soot lines, his eyes sharp. He wore a wide belt of turquoise beads and carried a bow that looked like it hadn't been idle in years. His eyes fell on Ruth's group, lingering longest on her. Ashki stepped forward first, his voice calm but firm. He spoke in his language, a rhythm of clicks and vowels Ruth could not understand. The older man listened without nodding, expression unreadable. Then he responded, deep and gravelly, his tone sharp. Ashki stiffened slightly. More words passed between them, quick and low. Ruth caught the shape of tension, the kind you feel between men with different ideas about what it means to protect a home. Then the older man stepped back, gestured toward the shelters. Ashki turned to the group. We stay tonight. Then we leave. That's it? Eli asked. No welcome? They don't know you yet. Ruth didn't take offense. She'd seen what fear could do to good people. Caution was a kind of love when you were living on the edge of the world. Inside one of the shelters, the warmth was stifling. The smoke hole above let in just enough light to illuminate the simple bedding. Animal pelts layered thick on packed earth. A woman entered shortly after, placing bowls of stew by the fire without a word. Her eyes were lined, her hair braided tightly behind her shoulders, and her hands bore calluses like Ruth's. Ruth met her gaze. They didn't smile, but they nodded, and that was enough. The stew was rich, rabbit, roots, and something pungent that made Maggie cough at first taste. She ate it anyway. Ruth watched her grandchildren eat in silence, their cheeks flushed with heat, eyes beginning to lose that hard edge they'd worn since the wagons vanished. Eli leaned back, rubbing his stomach. First time I've been full since. I don't even remember. Ruth didn't answer. Her eyes were on Ashki, who sat across from him, slowly chewing dried meat. He was watching the fire, the flicker of it painting shadows across his face. You know this place well, she said quietly. I came here once, years ago, after my mother died. The words dropped like stones into the silence. She was left behind, Ashki said after a moment. My uncle said we couldn't wait. Storm was coming. She had a fever. I was just a boy, but I stayed. You stayed with her? Maggie asked. He nodded until she passed. Then I came here. Eli shifted, uncomfortable. Ruth studied him. Why tell us that? Ashki finally looked at her. Because I see her in you. That same fire. Fire don't keep you alive in snow, she murmured. No, he said, but it tells the snow you're still fighting. The next morning broke gray and stiff. Snow had fallen in the night, light but steady, softening the world again. Ashki met them at the edge of the canyon where the trail forked sharply east. From here, he said, we climb. 2 hours. Then the valley. Your people live there? Maggie asked. He hesitated. Not all of them. Some live. Some remember how. They ascended the pass slowly. The slope grew steeper, the path thinner, sometimes no more than a ledge beside a sheer drop. Ruth's boots slipped once, sending a spray of snow down the cliffside. Eli grabbed her arm. I got you, he said, and his voice cracked. She caught her breath, nodded. Don't let go. I won't. They pushed upward. The wind returned just before they crested the ridge, sharp, clean, and angry. At the top, the world opened in full. Below, nestled between forested shoulders of land and framed by curling wisps of smoke, sat a small valley, a series of low dwellings built into the earth, their roofs covered in snow and cedar branches. Children ran between them, their laughter faint but bright. Dogs barked. Women moved between shelters, carrying bundles of wood or weaving fur. It was life, real, beating, alive. Maggie stepped beside Ruth, wide-eyed. It's beautiful. It is, Ruth whispered. Ashki didn't smile, but something softened in his posture. Will they let us stay? Eli asked, already wary again. No, Ashki said. Not yet. They will feed you. They will listen. But trust must grow. Like firewood, it doesn't burn if it's green. Ruth exhaled. That's fair. They descended into the valley. As they neared the edge of the camp, heads turned. Children stopped running. A few elders stood, watching with arms crossed. But no one reached for weapons. No one shouted. The people looked, saw, and waited. Ashki lifted his hand, spoke briefly in his language. The tension didn't leave entirely, but it didn't worsen either. One of the elders approached, a small woman with eyes like black flint and a voice like cracking bark. She spoke slowly to Ashki, then turned to Ruth. She said something Ruth didn't understand, then laid her hand gently over Ruth's heart and nodded. A gesture of welcome, or perhaps simply recognition. Ruth nodded back. They were led to a tent near the western slope, warm with firelight and thick blankets. Ruth sat slowly, knees grateful. Maggie collapsed into the furs beside her. Eli stood at the door, watching the camp. Feels weird, he said. Being safe. Don't get used to it, Ruth replied. But breathe while you got it. Ashki crouched by the fire, stoked it with a practiced hand. What now? Ruth asked. He didn't answer immediately. The firelight shimmered in his eyes. Now we see if you belong. Ruth's brow furrowed. You said this was shelter. It is, he replied. But winter's not done, and the valley remembers. Eli's voice came low, uncertain. Remembers what? Ashki looked up. That strangers bring storms. Ruth stared into the flames, her heartbeat steady. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight they were fed, they were warm, and they had not been turned away. It was enough for now. And when the wind howled again beyond the cliffs, Ruth didn't flinch. She listened. The fire crackled like a living thing in the heart of the tent, throwing shadows across Ruth's face as she stared into it. The warmth seeped into her joints, dulling the ache that had become her constant companion since the wagons left them to die. Beside her, Maggie slept deeply, her breathing soft and even under the mound of blankets. Eli sat near the doorway, whittling a stick into a point, eyes scanning the dark horizon beyond the flap. Ashki hadn't spoken since sundown. He crouched near the embers, sharpening his blade slowly, rhythmically, the steel whispering against stone. There was something in the air, something brittle and strained, like the stillness before a storm. They've seen us, Ashki said without lifting his gaze. Riders? This morning, tracks in the snow. Hooves. 2 men. Watching. Ruth's spine straightened. You sure? Ashki nodded once. Not dying. Their tracks are heavy, careless. Outlanders? Eli gripped his knife tighter. Raiders? Likely. Ruth's hands clenched in her lap. They followed us? No, Ashki said. They were already nearby, camped along the eastern ridge. But they've caught wind of something new, strangers in the valley. Eli looked at Ruth. What do we do? We don't panic, she answered, her voice calm. Panic gets you killed faster than bullets. Ashki stood. We'll warn the elders. They'll decide if the camp stays or scatters. Ruth rose slowly, feeling the old stiffness return with every step. Will help? Ashki held her gaze. You're not of this place. I've buried too many to be turned away from a fight, she said. If they come, we stand. For the first time, Ashki nodded with approval. Not as a guide, not as a stranger, as a warrior recognizing another. Outside, the camp moved in quiet urgency. Elders were already gathering, their faces hard, voices low and clipped. Children were ushered into the caves behind the dwellings. Weapons were passed, bows, knives, spears. Ruth could feel the tension rising, like heat from dry grass ready to burn. She turned to Eli. "Stay close to Maggie. If things go bad, you run. You don't wait for me." "No," he said firmly. "I'm not asking. I'm not leaving you." Their eyes locked. It was not a child she looked at anymore. Eli had been shaped by frost and hunger and fear, tempered like steel in the cold. He was still young, but no longer fragile. "All right," she said quietly. Maggie emerged from the tent, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's happening?" Eli moved to her side. "We might have company." "Bad kind." She didn't ask questions, just nodded and reached for Ruth's hand. From the ridge above the valley came the sound of a hawk cry, high, sharp, and sudden. Ashkiai's eyes darted to the cliffs. That was no bird. Moments later, a gunshot cracked through the air. The camp exploded into movement. Men rushed to the ridge with bows and spears, blending into the trees. Ashkiai gestured sharply. "Get inside, now." But it was too late. A second shot rang out closer. Then a voice echoed from the trees, gruff and arrogant. "Send out the strangers, the woman and her brats. You give them up, we leave." Ruth felt her stomach knot. They weren't guessing. They knew. Ashkiai pulled her aside. "They've been watching, listening." "Then we fight," Ruth said. He shook his head. "We have no guns. They have rifles. We must outthink them." Eli stepped forward, voice tight. "Then let's do it." Ashkiai looked to Ruth. "We lure them into the ridge path. It's narrow, one man at a time. We ambush." "How many?" she asked. "4, maybe 5. Then we'll need bait." "No," Eli said immediately. Ruth put a hand on his shoulder. "It's not bait if you plan the trap." Ashkiai grabbed a torch from the fire. "We'll light the path. Make it look like you're fleeing. They'll follow. We'll be waiting." Minutes later, the stage was set. Ruth and Eli walked the edge of the ridge, dragging a blanket behind them, kicking up snow. From the trees above, the flicker of torches gave the impression of retreat. Shouts followed. "There they go!" Boots thundered after them. Ruth didn't look back. They led the men down the ridge trail, a natural funnel between two rising slopes. On one side, a line of boulders. On the other, a steep drop. The first man came into view. He was broad, bearded, armed with a repeater rifle. Behind him, 2 others, lean and dust-covered, with wild eyes and cruel mouths. Ruth dropped low just before the bend. Ashkiai leapt from the trees above, silent and fast. His knife flashed, and the first man hit the snow with a thud, blood blooming across his chest. The second raider raised his rifle, but Eli was faster. He launched a rock that cracked against the man's temple, sending him reeling. Ashkiai finished him with a single brutal strike. The third fired blindly, missing wide. Ruth tackled him at the knees. He went down hard, gun clattering away. She drove her knee into his chest, pulled the knife from her belt, and pressed it to his throat. "You think we're prey," she growled. "You ain't the first to make that mistake." He gurgled, then went still. From above came a final shout, then silence. The last of the raiders had fled. Ashkiai stood in the snow, breathing hard. "They won't come back tonight." Ruth wiped blood from her sleeve. "Tomorrow? They'll think twice, or they'll bring more." "Either way," she said, "we'll be ready." They returned to the camp before dawn. The valley was quiet again, the fires low, the people solemn but steady. No cheers, no celebration, just a slow breath of those who survived. Maggie ran to them, eyes wide with relief. Ruth pulled her into her arms. Eli dropped to his knees, exhausted, shaking. Ashkiai stood with the elders, explaining the fight. No one blamed them. No one spoke of exile. Ruth sat by the fire that morning, staring at her hands, scarred, cracked, streaked with blood. She felt the tremble in her bones, the weight of every year and every loss. But something inside her was burning brighter than before. She was not dead weight. She was not a burden. She was a woman who had endured the winter and spit in the teeth of death. Ashkiai came and sat beside her. "They believe in you now," he said. "I don't care if they believe. I care if they survive." He nodded. "You could stay if you wanted." Ruth looked at Maggie, curled up in the blankets, asleep again at last. Eli beside her, finally still. Then she looked out to the snow-covered hills beyond the valley. I reckon I might. Ashki smiled just a little. Then we'll save you a place by the fire. The sky was warming now, streaked with pale orange. The storm had passed, at least for now, and Ruth, battered and weary, sat straighter than she had in years. She had walked through frost and fear, carried 2 children through wilderness and hunger, faced down wolves and men alike. And she had not broken. She had burnt, and the fire on the ridge still smoldered, waiting for the wind. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and comment. Share the video, support us with a super chat, or join our memberships to help us create more.